Sumo. Hi everyone, I'm Crow77, and today we're going to take a look at a special kind of Riichi Mahjong called Jankiryuu. As we typically do, let's start by defining exactly what Jankiryuu is. It's a specific style of Mahjong that takes the rules of Riichi and applies extra restrictions to it in order to facilitate so-called proper play. It's currently taught in the Japanese Mahjong dojo Pai no Oto, a parlor that follows the teachings of Sakurai Shuichi. Sakurai is a professional player from the older days of Mahjong, at least relative to current theory, being active during the Showa era. He is one of the most well-known players in Japan, earning himself the title of Mahjong Demon. With that said, I'm obviously much less experienced than Sakurai, especially in his style of play. So this video won't be focusing on his intention necessarily, but rather my thoughts on the benefits and applications of these rules based on modern theory. I won't be going into every single rule and nuance, but if you want to read more for them yourself, there will be a link in the description to an English translation of it, courtesy of Flan. There may also be some slight changes or differing interpretations from the actual rules, but he did a lot of work piecing together a particularly nebulous cloud of rules and information, so huge thanks to him. In addition, Danny Moreno wrote an article on Pai no Oto that was incredibly helpful too. It'll also be down below. So let's get into it. So the first rules we'll address are characterized as player behavior. Overall, these are great tips on how to keep your play clear and crisp, even if they might be a little bit pedantic. There is one key bit that stands out here though. This line is completely contrary to what people generally teach beginner to intermediate players in my experience, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. This is the pattern that we look at with a lot of new players. So when they first start, they know nothing of defense. They'll push everything. But when they learn how to properly defend, it looks like the best thing in the world. You never have to give up any huge amount of points or anything. So a lot of people end up defending far too much and tear apart every hand that they play as they're doing so, even if they could have a chance to win it. Only then will they eventually figure out how to balance the two properly. What this theory tries to do is cut out the middle section of this. It's teaching, right from the start, that you always want to be trying to win, even if the path isn't clear right away. This is a powerful mindset and can really elevate your play, so definitely something to try out and really push yourself towards learning. Moving on a bit, let's talk about the rules behind the general flow of the game. These are specifically related to how you're taking your turn and making calls and that sort of thing. The first encourages players to properly handle their tiles without knocking over walls or their hand or dropping their draw, which is something that can give up very valuable information in the hand, and sometimes it might even end up in a chumbo in bad situations. The second encourages you to make decisions ahead of when they would actually happen. Now, by the time you discard a tile on your turn, you should know everything about the state of your hand, including what tiles you should be calling, whether you're in tenpai or just trying to progress your hand. The most common times I've seen this kind of hesitation, even with expert players, is when a red 5 is discarded, whether or not you want to cheat it. So make sure you're analyzing everything about your hand, knowing exactly what you want to call, so you don't have to make any pauses right when the tile comes out. Now, one major rule change compared to most Riichi rules is that only on-cons are allowed. Now, if you've ever seen me talk about it on my live streams or anywhere else, I hate cons as a general concept, especially diamond cons, because they generally benefit your opponents more than you. This is because when you do an open con of any kind, you get one Dora indicator, just the one that gets flipped up. But anyone who declares a reach basically gets two, the regular con Dora, as well as a bonus Ura Dora from the Riichi. So Jankiryuu allows for cons only when it gives you that full benefit, when you're planning to or already have declared Riichi. This is a lesson that many beginner to intermediate players could learn, especially if you've been seeing the bronze room on Mahjong Soul. So I think this is a very beneficial rule to have players learn. So now let's talk about some additional restrictions on the game. These might seem very off the wall, but in Jankiryuu, you're not allowed to discard a wind or a dragon on the first discard. This is probably the most controversial and one of the more difficult lessons that Jankiryuu teaches. If you've read Sakurai's book, he mentions that it is quote-unquote honorable to allow your opponents time to draw the pair of their wind so that they can fight properly before you discard it. Obviously, based on modern theory, this isn't what I think is valuable about this lesson. So consider this hand. This is a hand that has some bad shapes that you want to take care of, and it could be a little bit slow. But on the bright side, it does have all 3 of the red Dora, so you really want to complete this as quickly as possible and get an easy mod gun out of it. A lot of players will autopilot in this kind of situation and look at discarding maybe the East Wind or something like that, but that's actually a mistake with this hand. The benefit of getting an honor pair here is very, very high versus a pair of pretty much anything else in the hand, since you already have the pair of 5-pin. So in this kind of situation, when you break that autopilot and evaluate the hand, you can realize that East is better to hold on to than, for example, the 9-so. Even though 9-so could be part of Itsu, that's very, very inefficient to go for with this kind of hand. So getting a Yakuhai would be much more valuable. In addition, there's a safety factor as well. Let's say you have this kind of hand and have a noticeable but maybe not insurmountable lead. One of the worst things that could happen to cause an upset would be an early Riichi that you can't defend against. But in that kind of situation, Yakuhai are generally better to discard than lone terminals, so discarding the 9-so on the first discard has defensive benefits too. Next, there is a rule that you cannot discard Dora before you hit Tenpai. Now, all of us, myself included, have been in situations where we've discarded a Dora early for efficiency reasons, only to draw another Dora or 2 before we hit Tenpai. This is exactly what this rule is trying to keep from happening. Dora are incredibly valuable, so much so that a lot of newer players tend to underestimate it. A pair of Dora takes the hand that's only worth a Riichi for 1,300 points to 5,200 points instead. It's a huge difference. So the objective of this rule is to teach players that you want to try to incorporate Dora into your hand at all costs. I have seen some newer players discarding Dora in the first line, and sometimes in marginal situations too from an efficiency perspective, like discarding an isolated 5 over a Dora 3, with nearly no change in the efficiency whatsoever. It has another benefit too, where if you see another player discard Dora, you're immediately much more aware of their hand, because with the Jankiryuu rules, you know that they have to be in Tenpai at that point. This is kind of one of the very basics of discard reading in Riichi Mahjong, being able to tell when opponents' hands are starting to become dangerous and when you need to start changing the defense even if there isn't a Riichi on the table. The next point is an interesting one. You cannot Riichi if the Riichi tile creates a Tsuji trap, such as discarding a 5 from a 5-7-9 shape. Jankiryuu operates on a principle where Mahjong isn't necessarily some mind game where you're trying to trick your opponents. Instead, your goal should be to get a good hand to a good shape where you can sumo instead, trying to draw assuming your opponents are going to play perfect defense the entire time. So, in addition, people who are paying attention to your hand might also see you sumo giri Riichi and know that they need to be very wary of a Tsuji trap, which discourages this bad shape and tries to get you to build your hand a different way. Lastly, bad weights are discouraged in particular. Both Hadaka Tanki and Jigoku Tanki Riichi are not allowed. This is good practice for any game. There are very few hands that are worth making 4 calls for the Hadaka Tanki, and the Jigoku Tanki Reach goes right back towards not trying to trick your opponents into dealing in. You really do want to maximize those chances to sumo. These are both very important lessons for someone to learn, whether it's through normal experience or through playing Jankiryuu. So, overall, there's a lot of very strange rules from an outdated time of Mahjong, but there is a lot to learn here. So, don't try to, take these rules and apply these directly to your Riichi game, but it is definitely important to learn the concepts, learn when to apply them, and then go from there. So give it a shot and let me know in the comments down below how it goes. I'll see you guys next time.